Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorraine Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Sandra Cisneros. Thank you for joining us.
Yet again, I always love being on this show.
We
Thank you.
love having you on, and you have so many fans here. I just want to give a little of your background. You got the MacArthur Genius Grant.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened to me because I always thought I wasn't very smart, but I guess I was a genius and didn't know it.
The Lannan Foundation gave you their literary award. Penn gave you the Best Fiction Award. You got the Frank Dobie Award, National Endowment for the Arts, the American Book Award, and this is probably your most famous book, The House on Mango Street.
My firstborn.
And we're now just past the 25th anniversary.
Oh, a little bit longer because I handed it in November 30th, 1982. And then it became published a couple of years later. So I always have to do the math, which I'm not very good at.
And 20 languages at least?
Over 20 languages,
and
that's right.
Millions of copies sold.
Yes.
And you had the honor of being one of the banned books in Arizona.
Yes, I'm very proud of that. Woo!
Some of your other books are this lovely book, Have You Seen Marie? There's one called Woman Hollering Creek, and this exquisite Carmelo.
My favorite.
But we are also celebrating this beautiful book, The House of My Own, Stories from My Life. They're calling it a memoir, but you didn't really create it as a memoir.
No, I was writing it in the back burner while I was working on other books. I put together talks and essays and lectures from 30 years of my life, and I didn't realize it's a memoir to some people, but if I'd known it was a memoir, I may not have been able to write it.
So it's more a patchwork, memorializing different parts of your life,
yes,
and then
so
letting them come
then
together.
Putting them together and saying, what am I writing about? And then cutting out the repetition so that it could have a better flow for the readers now. And it'll be out in paperback this October.
And one other thing that I want to mention, because you're here as part of the UNM Summer Writers Conference.
That's right.
And you're also here to do a tour. I don't know if our audience knows that the National Hispanic Cultural Center has a special exhibit dedicated to the House on Mango Street.
That's right.
And it's different artists interpreting the community. It's up until September 25th, so that your fans and people who are interested in family, community, coming of age, all these things can come and see this. Here, this is one of the art pieces that very colorfully. This was curated at the Chicago.
Yes, Museum of the National Museum of Mexican Art, Chicago, curated the show originally, and they created a kind of umbrella of inviting artists from across the country, different cultures, different communities, to think about the themes of House on Mango Street and create original or submit works of art. So it's not just my book; it's everyone else's lives and stories from coast to coast across the country.
Because your book has touched so many people in their lives. And there's two pieces of art. This is just one of them. This is an artist named Annie Lopez who her dad was fighting Alzheimer's, and she took photographs of his notes to himself, and she did 2 dresses. One is his notes to himself to help him remember. The other one that I don't have a picture of is the excuses from her family about how they couldn't possibly help her take care of her dad.
Yes.
I was so moved.
Me too. That's one of my favorite pieces in the whole exhibit. 1, because I like dresses, and 2, because I like text on clothes. And it's so moving to look at the dress and read the notes with the dad's faltering handwriting, and then see all the notes that family gives you not to come around and help. And it's just so moving.
One of the wonderful aspects of your memoir, or your House of My Own, is your relationship to your family. You were the one daughter, and you have 6 brothers.
That's right. Yes. I always tell people that's what made me a writer.
Yeah.
Had to survive the 6 brothers.
And if we look at the evolution of a house of my own, so you didn't have your own room. You had no privacy in this booming, busy house.
When you have 7 kids, you seldom have 7 bedrooms. You share rooms, and, when you're little, you sleep 4 to a bed, 2 faced in, with one direction with your head and the feet, and the other 2 in the pillows, and you just make do. You use middle rooms and whatever you can, roll-away beds or lazy boys to put all of us to have a bedroom. So for a long time, I did not have a room of my own, and maybe that's why room of my own, the idea of a house of my own, was so important to me as
because
a writer.
Virginia Woolf already took a room of my own.
Well, I thought that I needed more than a room of my own. I wanted a house of my own because I didn't want to hear other people's noise, and I wanted to be able to keep friends and family from knocking on the door when they thought you weren't doing anything, when you were actually maybe imagining or thinking or looking at the blank piece of paper before a poem comes. That's an important part of writing too. And for a family like mine, they didn't know what to make of me. I was very moody and the crybaby, and I spent a lot of time talking to the trees and looking at clouds, and I didn't know it then, but that's what artists do. You have very rich interior life, and you've got a mom with all these children to feed and brothers making a lot of noise. It's not exactly the creative world that you need as a young
And your
woman.
dad referred to your activities as a vampire because the only time you could be unbothered was the middle of the night when everyone was finally asleep.
Yeah, that's what you learn to do when you have to share space with a lot of people. Sometimes you don't have a room of your own, so you get a time of your own.
Yeah.
Gotta
yeah.
adapt.
Yes. So one of the beautiful things in your memoir, A House of My Own, is you go through all the places you've lived, which is a wonderful, because in the house in Greece, you actually wrote The House on Mango
Yeah,
Street.
people don't realize that I finished the book in the Aegean on a tiny little Greek island, which was very far away from where I started the book in the Iowa cornfields, over the years of my 20s, from 22 to 28. And I wanted to let younger women, especially young people who are artists, see that there's another way to be than maybe the way that society wants you to be, and to understand that, I just didn't spring out of my father's head as an author. It took a long route of fighting and bumping up against odds and making a lot of mistakes to be who I am now. So it's kind of a road map, a disaster map of, those little crosses you see on the side of the road.
Descansos,
Those are my disasters and how I got to be who I am today.
Well, we're glad that you have gotten to be who you are today.
Thank you.
You're famous for one house, the San Antonio house, that you painted this muy alegre, wonderful color of purple, or periwinkle, I think.
Yes,
you called
periwinkle.
it.
Yeah.
And the Historic Review people were horrified. And then you innocently ended up in this long battle, during which time the house faded to a nice pink color.
It faded to actually a chambray blue. And
perfect.
then it looked boring to me, so I asked when I was in the battlefield with the Historic Review if I could paint it pink, because they had documented a house in the neighborhood that had been pink that a Cuban man had owned in the 1880s. I guess he was homesick for Cuba, so I had permission to paint it pink.
And, we've spoken about this many times, but I love what you said. The real color that changed was the color of the historic board.
That's right.
So that they were much more diverse and had different...
Exactly. And, even though I had to, be crucified and go through the trials of Job, in the end, it all worked out for the best. There's more color in the historic neighborhood, and people are now looking at the history of the Americas as models, not just history in Europe, for what colors we can use.
So you go through in this book all of the houses, and I recently watched an interview you had with Jorge Ramos of Univision, and you had said something I hadn't heard before. There are many, you explain why a house is so important. It's a fortress for your creative spirit. Nobody can bother you. You can write when you want to write. And then describe what happened when this light came to you.
Well, I had this mystical experience, and I don't know how to explain it, except that I went to Mexico in an area where my ancestors are from for hundreds of years. I was there kind of visiting, and I went to bed, and I'm a real sleeper, and I woke up in the middle of the night, wide awake, and I thought, now what? It's not dawn yet, and I'm not usually up at this time, and so I sat up and just thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to meditate. But before I could do that, a thought came into my head, and it didn't come from me. I don't know if it was sent from my ancestors or my higher self or the guardians, or I have no idea. All I know is that it popped into my head, neither in English nor in Spanish, and it told me something I didn't know. It said, "You are not your house." And this was so startling to me. I thought, oh my God, I'm not my house. That's true. I'm not my house. So that means I can get up and walk away from the house that I had built in San Antonio. At that point, I was deeply involved in fundraising for the foundations I've created and thinking of the legacy of my home as being a literary center for generations to come. But it was taking up my life and stressing me out and not allowing me to think clearly to create. So that message, I don't know who sent it, but thanks, I think was the beginning step for me to leave Texas and to look for that house of my own where I could protect my creative self instead of nurturing other writers.
And I want to acknowledge you for founding the Macondo Foundation.
Yes.
Which gave workshops for socially active
writers, and still does,
and
under the
still
auspices of the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center in San Antonio. But I founded it, but I needed to walk away from it and hand it over to that art center where I had originally worked when I just came to Texas, and to say, okay, I've started this. It's time to pass the baton. If it doesn't survive, so be it. Now I need to focus on my work.
And then after you left San Antonio, you did some wandering around, sort of.
I was looking to where to live. I thought about moving to New Mexico. I thought about Arizona, but of course, I didn't like that my books were banned there, and it was very difficult. And I also didn't feel that, even though I love coming to New Mexico, it wasn't quite my home. It's a beautiful space with so much spirituality and so much inspiration. But it wasn't until I was in Guanajuato working on my book, I said, this is where my ancestors want me to be. This is where I hear them and where I can create.
We're speaking today with Sandra Cisneros about her wonderful memoir, A House of My Own, Stories from My Life. There's a piece that you wrote when you were in Santa Fe.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could read it. It's not particularly about Santa Fe, but the fact that
Yes.
you're back in Santa Fe, and I love that piece. If you would just read these wonderful paragraphs.
Yes, it's from an essay called The Author Responds to Your Letter, because a woman in North Texas wrote to me and wanted my book banned from the school library. And I wrote this letter from Santa Fe, where I was staying at the Inn of the Turquoise Bear on Wednesday, November 11, 2009. And I think the way to write to people who don't agree with us is to imagine you're writing it to someone you love, but who you have a hard time with because they don't think like you. So I imagined I was writing to my father, who was often did not understand me. And it allowed me to write from a place of respect so that this woman could hear me. And so I wanted to tell her why I had written what I had. She thought it was full of witchcraft, and here I am defending what I've written. Now, I must address your objection to my book featuring witches. Your fear is a cultural misinterpretation, I suspect. In Mexican culture, we have gifted women who are called brujas or curanderas. They are healers, herbalists, visionaries, midwives, advisors, and spiritual guides. Women have these same intuitive gifts in North American culture too, but here they're called intuitives, counselors, holistic doctors, therapists, psychics, health workers, social workers, nurses, artists, or nuns. Brujas are not necessarily the same as an evil sorceress, though they can be if they use people's fear for their own gain. I have known a lot of politicians, media personalities, and religious folks who use people's fear for their own gain. And if you ask me, these are the sorcerers we need to be wary of. In my perspective, anyone who works with their positive, feminine, spiritual energy is a bruja, brujo, and we all have the ability to develop this divine gift, just as we all have the potential to turn into public menaces by working from fear. Now, I don't want to name any names, but I think
it is
it's
very
timely for now.
appropriate for right now.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. And you do, when you're clipped with Jorge Ramos, you do talk about how we need someone who can lead us toward the light,
We need
not someone who
a wise human being who is calm in difficult times, who's not working from anger and fear, so we can have clarity so they can guide us to light and not darkness.
Now, one of the reasons you've come here is to talk to aspiring writers
Yes.
about writing.
Yes,
Yeah.
because I think of writing as being a work of the spirit. As we have to, as writers, as artists, transform our own demons into light. And we do work for others who can't do that sitting meditation. We do it for them. And I hope that the artwork that we create will help other people with the same wounds to find their own light.
But some of your instructions are daunting. Because when in that you say it's best not to write about the things you remember, but to write about the things you wish you could forget.
That's
well, that's
right.
why people want to forget them.
Right, and that's why it's so hard to be an artist, because we have to walk through those fires. You know, we're not remembering, we relive them and walk through the fire. But we walk through the fire so that those who can't, we can come through to the other side and guide them and teach them and go through that pain for them, and then we give them the piece of art that's the medicine to cure them. So, we're just like in times now when there's so much confusion. I think the artists are the visionaries that, like the shaman, have to go through great, great pain and trauma to transform what looks dark and roiled in dark times and open up so that there's wisdom and light.
I think, of course, that's why people love your writing so much. You go down into that well that we all draw from, but most of us are afraid to go that
Yes.
deep. And your book, The House on Mango Street, is taught in high schools and junior highs.
And universities. And,
yeah, but especially for young people who finally, because it is in some respects a coming-of-age story,
Yes.
to have their own experience mirrored back to them in your work is wonderful.
Lorene, I never wrote that book for it to be a bestseller or be famous. I was just a high school teacher. But what it taught me is that anything we make on behalf of others with no personal agenda for ourselves, whatever we do selflessly in the name of love, siempre sale bonito. It always comes out beautiful. And I think it puts us in a state of grace to serve that way.
Beautifully, beautifully put. You do a lot of outreach to young people, and last time you were here, you were talking to some 7th graders. You described them that poetry, trying to get them to come up with some images, poetry is like a knife at your throat.
Yeah.
That's the thing that you can't get away from. That's what you need to write about.
Well, it's because we have so many things that silence us, and we're censored to even think about certain things. And art is that place where we're allowed to speak. And we don't always want to hear what we have to say. Sometimes the things we have to say are not pleasant. But it doesn't mean that when we write, we stay in that angry or dark place. Writing is a compost. You start from wherever you are, and you keep writing until you get to a little tiny flower that grows out of the garbage. And so you don't end with the anger or the despair, the grief, the envy. You start where you are, and you stop writing when a little white flower grows from the garbage.
But it is an arduous process, and you were telling some of the
It's
people...
hard work, but it's not like tarring roofs in New Mexico in the summertime. So I have to say, other people work harder than me, and my ancestors worked harder. They were migrant farm workers. So, sometimes I just cry and think, "Ooh, this is so hard." And I think, "Oh, cállate, what a crybaby." Your ancestors walked across the America, so ask them for strength. And when I do that, the task of writing my page and a quarter seems much easier.
So tell us your process, because
Well-
you do say at one point that you don't like the writing so much, but you love having written.
Yes, writing is like going to the gym. It's just so awful. It's like you don't want to go, you don't want to sit there. But after you've done it, you think, well, look what I made. That wasn't so bad. But it takes a long time to get to it, to sit there and not move and not go on the internet and read your email or buy shoes. It's a lot of effort to just stick to the page. So I try to get all the help I can by asking my father and mother spirit and all the people before me who had more difficult lives to help me focus. I try to do it with love for them. Can I do work that honors them? And that helps me stay on track.
Well, you certainly have honored them. In one of the chapters of your book, you talk about you were at a Day of the Dead cemetery with a friend, and you were getting spooked a little bit because it is, after all, ghosts. And then you thought, I will call forth an ancestor that I know loves me and will protect me.
Yes.
Tell me
and
about
that's
that
because
story.
we're split, those of us who are Mexican and American, that we're split with the kind of North American fear of death as being something scary. And then when you go into the indigenous beliefs of the Americas, you realize your spirits are there, but they're family and they're kin, they're allies, they love you. So you do have bad ghosts out there, vagrant spirits, but you can call your family and all of your tribe, all of your ancestors to surround you and protect you when you're afraid. And I do this a lot. Every time I have to write or speak or drive my car from Santa Fe to Albuquerque in a rainstorm, I just ask for their protection and I feel better.
You were talking with Jorge Ramos about when you have to say where you're from or what is your cultural identity and all this. You practically have to provide your spiritual passport, your cultural paperwork, because they used to say, you'd say, well, I'm Mexican, because you're half Mexican, half Chicana.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd say, well, where in Mexico? And like hit you with all these questions. So now you found a way.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, where are you from?
I am from the United States with Mexican indigenous roots. And I always say, or when I'm over there, soy mexicana con raíces estadounidenses.
Uh-huh.
And I do claim that now, the indigenous part, because my mother was 44% indigenous, and this is proven in my DNA. So I have to claim all of my past, my Sephardic Jewish ancestry on my father's side, my mother's indigenous roots, the Southern European roots, the Northern African roots. All of that makes us the best possible ambassadors for building bridges between cultures in this time of divisiveness. So I think those of us who are mestizos, who are half and half, or whatever your border that you cross, you're put on this planet to help build bridges so that communities can understand each other. What a gift to have that, so that you can communicate and have communities work towards peace and a responsibility.
Yes, yes. Writers always flock to you. They, ask you to sign their books, and they ask you, how do you do this? How do you do this? So you've been instructing writers or advising them. I know that there are writers, aspiring writers who are watching us now. What is some of your simple advice you can give to somebody who would love to write like you write?
Well, I would tell them to write as if they're wearing their pajamas and they're talking to one person who could see them across the kitchen table, and to talk their piece to that one person, because that person is someone you trust. To write it as if you're speaking. And then after you're done, to edit the piece as if you're sitting across from your enemy and revise it.
Wow.
You don't do them both at the same time. Because if you're thinking of your enemy or who's going to read it, the first time you're writing it, you block yourself. You want it to sound like you.
Because sometimes we are actually our own worst enemy.
We always
and
are.
That,
Yes.
that editing voice, oh no, don't say that. When you do a reading, you often share secrets with people, and they feel so bonded to you that you've opened up and told them your secrets.
People tell me things that they don't tell other authors. People come up to me and share stories that they've never spoken to anyone's things they should share with their religious leader or their therapist. Sometimes I feel a little bit overwhelmed that they've trusted me with such dark and beautiful secrets. And I often spend more time after the lecture listening to people. They've come from a long way to tell me something. I make sure I eat a lot of protein so I have energy for that post hour of talking to my listeners and readers.
Now, you have been looking for a house of your own, and you have it now.
I do.
Tell us where you live and tell us a little about your house, although it's still, as you said, being deconstructed and reconstructed.
I tell people my house is under destruction in central Mexico, and it's actually not an old house, but I had renovation made to make it fit. It's not a big house. I'm downsized to a guest house, so I had to make it work for a person to live there all year round. And I always wanted to live in a convent after I lived in the public purple house. I said, I really need to find a convent, but a convent of one. And I have found that a house with a high wall, you keep people away. They cannot bother me. I took away the doorbell, and I left only a bell with a hairy rope. And I can look down from the top of the terrace and say, no, I don't know you. I don't want to open the door. And, I can just keep my pajamas on all day if I want, and don't put on my shoes, don't comb my hair. And those are the days when I do the best writing.
Uh-huh. Well, by the way, it's a home to one human, but you have 5 little dogs. When I think of you living in apartments,
herd.
You're looking 5 dogs shorter than your knee.
Now, since I last saw you, Lorene, unfortunately, I have 4.
I'm
so
sorry.
I was rich and now I'm poor. I only have 4 dogs.
Oh.
But if you put them all together, they weigh the same weight as one big Labrador.
Well, excellent, excellent. I will think happy thoughts of your being in your own
thank you so
individual
much.
convent. But anyone who feels that urge and looking for a home, you write about it so beautifully in this memoir, A House of My Own. And we're celebrating again your famous The House on Mango Street. Our guest today, the wonderful author Sandra Cisneros. Thank you for joining us.
Lorene, always a pleasure to be here.
Well,
thank you.
Come back next time you're in town. I'm Lorene Mills. I want to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.